So now we get to the football. Jim says, I know from Leviticus 11:6-8 that touching the skin of a dead pig makes me unclean, but may I still play football if I wear gloves? He's of course referring to footballs that are made from pigskin, and being that the Torah forbids touching the skin of a dead pig, so what about if he wears gloves? Can he still play football? Okay, that's a cute one. What's he talking about? We have to actually look into this one, and this one we have to give Jim a bit of flack here. That he wouldn't be able to understand what the Torah means by this, and that's understandable because without going into the tradition, the oral tradition, you can't understand what this law is about. Indeed, in the laws of talking about kosher and non-kosher animals, the Torah lists non-kosher species of animal and says about them that their flesh you should not eat, and their carcasses you should not touch. You should not touch the carcasses of these dead animals. And elsewhere it explains that would make you unclean if you touch the carcass of a dead animal. Now, the truth is, the carcass of any animal would render one unclean, tameh, spiritually impure, just like a human corpse also renders us impure. If you're in the presence of a dead body, in the same room, or certainly touch a dead body, you're in a state of impurity. Impurity doesn't mean that you've done a sin or done something wrong. Sometimes it's the right thing, sometimes it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to attend a funeral, to participate in a burial, to prepare a body for burial. These are all mitzvahs. It's a commandment, an obligation, and a righteous thing to do. However, it does put you in a state of impurity, because any contact with death makes us impure. And even a dead animal, the dead carcass is impure. However, the relevance of that is only in the temple times, not today, because for us to become impure doesn't actually impact us. The state of impurity meant that you could not enter the temple, you couldn't eat a sacrifice, you couldn't do holy things.
What about Kohanim though?
Kohanim still have to maintain a level of purity because we hope for the temple to be built, and they'll be called upon to do the service, so they have to stay in a state of purity as much as possible. So a Kohen has to stay like even today, but a non-Kohen had no obligation to stay away from impurity. You could become impure; it's not an issue. Just you then have to go through a purity process in order to eat holy food from the temple or to participate in temple goings on.
Isn't everyone impure though today? So what's
we are on a level of impurity, but a Kohen is supposed to not increase that impurity to try and stay as pure as possible. So in this about this particular one, it explains that there's an interesting idea that why a dead animal is impure, but what about this is even a kosher species of dead animal. So then how can we handle food? Like handling a piece of steak is also a dead animal, but that's been slaughtered. If it's been slaughtered in a kosher way by shchita, it does not make you impure. A kosher species that was slaughtered does not make you impure. A non-kosher species, you can't slaughter it. Even if you slaughter it, it is still impure. But a kosher species is not. Why? A fascinating explanation is given by the Rekanti. Rekanti was a Kabbalist who lived in Sfat, and he explains, he goes through the deeper meaning of the mitzvahs, and he explains that when an animal dies normally on its own, so then who killed it? The Malach HaMavis, the angel of death. It was visited by the angel of death, and that contact with the angel of death gives it an impurity. Whereas if you shecht it according to law, then you've done it in a mitzvah way, in a holy way, so then the angel of death is not involved in that. And so therefore it is pure. It is not impure.
What if someone was sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin and killed ritually, spiritually, that was done by man?
Correct, but that's not shchita. It's not shchita.
Okay.
But it is an advantage for the soul of that person. If a person was guilty of a sin and are found guilty and put to death by the Sanhedrin, so then that their soul is cleansed of that sin, and they have to be then treated like a brother. They're now innocent of their sin because they've been cleansed by it. So there is an advantage to that. But it's not shchita. It's not quite the same. So that's just an interesting insight into that. But the Talmud or the Midrash on this verse, talking about becoming unclean, says a fascinating thing, that it doesn't really make sense that the Torah could here be telling everyone to avoid contact with the carcass of an animal. Why? Because when it talks about the dead body of a human being, only a Kohen is told not to contaminate himself through contact with a dead body. Everyone else, for anyone else, it's a mitzvah to participate in a funeral, to be close, to go to a cemetery. There's no problem whatsoever. A Kohen is told not to. So if, when it comes to a human body, which is the highest level of impurity, a human corpse, it's only Kohanim who are told not to become impure. So when it comes to a carcass of an animal, could that be something that no one is allowed to do? It couldn't be, the Talmud says. It's this warning to not touch a carcass is only talking about somebody who is intending to go into the temple. He should know that by touching a carcass, you invalidate yourself. So it says on a regel, on a pilgrimage festival, everybody has to be careful not to touch a dead animal, because then you can't go into the temple and bring your sacrifices, which you have to do on a pilgrimage festival. So it's not actually a prohibition. It's telling you that you have to be careful not to become impure at times when you need to be pure and go into the temple. But it's not actually forbidden. And so therefore, a fascinating thing comes out of this. We know that the mitzvahs are divided into positive and negative commandments. There are the things that you're supposed to do and things you're supposed to not do. So a positive commandment is to put on tefillin. A negative commandment is not to eat on Yom Kippur. All mitzvahs are one of the two, either a positive commandment or a negative commandment. The commandment that it says that to not touch the carcass of a dead body, is that a positive or a negative commandment? The carcass of an animal.
Positive?
Negative. It's not do. Do not do.
It sounds like
Yeah.
to not do something.
But you wouldn't have asked them.
Exactly. so it seems obviously a negative commandment. No. So the Sefer Chinuch explains that no, it's not a negative commandment. This is a positive commandment to judge the person who has touched the carcass as being impure. It's a positive statement, not a negative statement. It's not a prohibition to touch the carcass of a dead animal. It's not a prohibition in the first place. It's not something you're forbidden to do. The Torah is just saying, if you do that, you become impure. So don't do that when you need to go into the temple, because then you can't go into the temple. But it's not that you've transgressed the prohibition. There's a law called the law of impurity when you touch a carcass.
It's not a sin.
It's not a sin, correctly. So therefore, certainly for our friend Jim, he's allowed to play football with his pigskin ball. It's not an issue. He doesn't need to wear gloves because there's no temple. He's anyway probably not Jewish, and so the laws of impurity anyway don't apply to him. But even if you were Jewish, and even if there was a temple, you could still play with your pigskin ball as long as you're not planning to immediately go into the temple. And if you are, so then you have to go through a purity process, and then you can go into the temple. So his football is fine.